Well, good morning, Southside. It's great to come to you this morning, and I'm going to look at James, James chapter 3, and verse 13. So, James chapter 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So these are some really wonderful verses, and they describe the idea of wisdom that comes from above. Um, Wisdom is a really powerful theme throughout the Bible, and obviously, people think of the book of Proverbs, which is a book filled with wisdom. And the idea of wisdom literature in the Bible is the kind of wisdom that applies to the sort of day-to-day things that we do in life. Okay, so um, maxims or proverbs sayings that if we apply them generally mean our life will turn out for the better. The thing about a proverb or a wise saying is that while there are general rules for life, there are exceptions. Sometimes things happen that take us in a different direction, or a tragedy occurs that turns the proverb upside down. So it's important to distinguish between what generally happens. So, meaning that if you're careful with your money and you don't spend more than you make, you'll do better than if you spend more than you have. But that isn't also a guarantee that nothing from the outside, an outside shock, will occur that could mean that you would need money. So sometimes a person can do everything they possibly can to save and be careful, and be careful with their finances, with what they have. But then something can happen to them, sickness or a tragedy, a car accident, things that can come out of nowhere that can still mean that you might end up having financial struggles, even though you've done all that you can to avoid that. So while a proverb can tell us that this is the general outcome if you follow these principles, it's not a guarantee. What's the difference between the wisdom, say, of Proverbs and the wisdom that we see here in James 3? Who is wise and understanding among you? So this is a person who lives with the general principles of wisdom, following the principles that are laid down in Scripture for how we should live our life, conduct our life. And the key here is in verse 13, at the end of the verse, good conduct, show your works in meekness, meekness of wisdom. So here's the point, that true wisdom ought to make us very humble, very meek. Oftentimes in religious communities, we see the opposite. We see this idea of self awareness of how wise a religious leader is, showing how profound their wisdom and their understanding is, and they conduct their lives maybe sometimes a little bit apart from others with a sense of judgment towards those around them. And really, what we see with true wisdom, the effect of applying actual wisdom to our lives, ought to make us more meek. Let me put it to you like this. I've done a lot of study, and the effect of, I think, true study is humility. The more, some people say it this way, the more you know, the more you realize how little you actually know. And that's really what wisdom ought to do. The more we understand about life, the more we understand about the world, we ought to walk in a spirit of humility and meekness. We ought to conduct our lives with this kind of gentleness that says, look, I really don't know everything. I really don't understand everything. I want to be humble. I want to be meek. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to confront others with an attitude of superiority. And verse 14 speaks to this. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast and be false to the truth. So James writes about this kind of religious, in this context is really about religious communities, about churches. If you're someone who's struggling with jealousy about leadership, who's in charge of what, or selfish ambition, he's really kind of putting a seatbelt on these people, saying, you really need to be quiet. You really shouldn't be projecting yourself. You really shouldn't be talking about things. This is not wisdom that is divine. This is not godly wisdom. In fact, James goes so far as to say this is demonic wisdom. It's the idea of saying, look, I'm better than everyone else. I'm superior. I know everything. And when you think about how dark so much of the world is right now, when we think about how much racism, bias, harmful words, judgmental criticism, so much darkness that we deal with. And we see that in church communities as well. This is not wisdom from God. This is a different kind of wisdom, and it creates a lot of darkness, a lot of tragedy. In fact, James goes on in verse 16 to say, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be what? Disorder, disunion, lack of harmony, lack of togetherness, and every vile practice. Wow, my goodness, that's really strong words. Every vile practice, every sort of dark, awful thing that can happen flows out of this jealousy and selfish ambition. You know, church ought to be a place where people are welcome. It ought to be a place where you can come and be authentic. It ought to be a place where you can come and be around people who really want to help you and help each other, and allow you the space to be honest about your struggles, your concerns. And when you have a church where that's not possible, where there's more of a spirit of judgmentalism, that's very difficult. The problem is church lends itself to that sort of hypocrisy, selfish ambition. Why? Well, because church by definition is a place where people talk about rules of life, rules of behavior, how you ought to live. And it's very easy to get caught up in living these rules or these practices and then judging others by your superiority, saying, well, I keep the rules better than you do. And so you're not as holy, you're not as righteous, you're not as close to God, quote unquote, as I am. Which then means it becomes very easy to create sort of a pecking order, if you will, within the church. So, the really, really superior ones get to kind of rise up to the top, and the not so holy ones are kind of pushed to the margins. That's really not the picture of what an authentic church community ought to be. It ought to be a place where people can come together in a spirit of truth. And verse 14 speaks to that. Bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts. Don't boast and be false about the truth. What is true? What is right? What is honest? And these are very important questions when we think about church practice, church leadership. Verse 17 says, the wisdom from above, and this from above is mean wisdom from God. It has some characteristics to it. It's pure. It's peaceable. It's gentle. Think about those things. Pure. So it's pure of heart. Leading and helping and serving, all of those things are very important things. And they're very necessary to any community. And certainly a church is no exception. But purity of heart demonstrates certain characteristics. It's peaceable. It's gentle. It's open to reason. Full of mercy and good fruits. One of the things about being full of mercy and good fruit, and this idea of fruit is something that you see throughout the Bible, but the idea of the nature of fruit, flows out of a tree. The idea of a tree, and the tree of life is something that's a very, very big theme from the beginning to the end of the scripture. And so, but this idea of a tree bearing good fruit and bad fruit means that, there's something in what you choose to consume, the good fruit, the bad fruit. What you consume is what flows out of you. So what you put in is what comes out, okay? That's what your nourishment will be demonstrated by your actions. If you're full of mercy and good fruit, you don't have any room for anything but that. Meaning you're full of this, so you have no room for the other. You're so full of God's wisdom, you don't have any room for the other kind of wisdom. Okay, what James describes as demonic wisdom or the wisdom of this world, because you're so full of divine wisdom, good wisdom. And this idea of mercy and good fruit, when you're full of that, you don't have any room for anything else. Impartial, fair. So leaders have to make judgments. In fact, we all have to make some judgments about who we relate to, who we connect with, who we talk to, who we seek out for counsel. So we're all kind of making judgments, and there's a difference between making really good critical decisions and then just judging others in an unfair way. So this is two different types of judgmentalism, okay? So there's the kind of judgmentalism that people really don't like in religious communities. It's like, well, you're just judging me all the time. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about making really good critical decisions, good choices, and that's a form of judgment. So we all make judgments about what we should do, where we should work, the clothes we wear, the foods we eat. We're constantly making judgments. And this idea of impartiality, or being impartial, means we make fair judgments. So we see the wisdom from above is a pure wisdom, means we're pure of heart. Then we reflect that by being peaceable, gentle, open to reason, meaning you can communicate and talk to someone and you can reason with them, full of mercy and good fruits, and impartial and sincere. And what is the kind of the outcome of all of this? Verse 18 tells us, a harvest of righteousness. It's a beautiful verse. A harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Now this is an absolutely beautiful text, and it's a wonderful promise, a harvest of righteousness. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 18 is a direct connection to this verse. It says, the wicked earns deceptive wages, but one who sows righteousness gets a sure reward. Okay, so there's kind of, and you can find other parallels throughout the prophetic writings, but is a direct connection to that verse. So the idea, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So if you go out and you sow peace and you make peace, you glean, you harvest righteousness. Really and truly, this world has such a need for peace. And peace, joy, and love are fruits of the Christian faith, the authentic, right way of drawing in wisdom, the wisdom of God. I can't think of a better thing right now for Southside and frankly for any Christian community. When you think of the world we're in, it's to draw on the wisdom of God and to literally seek to sow peace, to make peace with one another, with the communities around us, with as many people as we can encounter and touch. And there is a promise that when we act this way, when we demonstrate and walk in an active sense of being at peace, making peace, that we actually sow a harvest of righteousness, a harvest of goodness, a harvest of unity, a harvest of really and truly a place that lives with true, authentic love, grace, and joy. But the key to all of this is ultimately being at peace yourself. And that flows out of being at peace with God. And of course, we know that the foundation of being at peace with God is knowing truly in our hearts what John 3:16 tells us, which is, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. And so the ground of peace is knowing that we're forgiven. Because we're forgiven, we can forgive others, that there is a authentic grace from an authentic God who loves us in our true condition, has made peace with us, so that since we have peace with God, we can have peace with others. We can make peace because someone has made peace with us. And then as we make peace with as many as we can, we reap a harvest of righteousness, not for ourselves, but truly shining light in dark places. And where we are in today's world, we need a lot more people sowing peace. So I hope this has been encouragement to you. I've enjoyed the chance to speak to you today from James 3, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend, rest of your weekend. God bless.